morning, good afternoon, or good evening, whenever you watch this video. Today I'm here sitting with Gillian Saunders. She is associate professor in our faculty, and the two of us have experience in a international design synthesis exercise, multiple even. And the interesting part of that is that there was a group in Northern Ireland and a group in Delft working together, and later also a group in Delft and a group in Australia working together. And that meant that the DSE had to be done quite a bit online, and that's what we're going to experience this year as well. So I asked Gillian to join me here today and try to get all kind of information from her on how we could approach the online character of this year's DSE, how we could make this a success for you. So Gillian, can you tell a little bit about the experience we had with that exercises in those years?
So you have to remember when we first started, internet, Wi-Fi didn't exist yet. Most of us literally had to find hard copy cables, and mobile phones were also still very sparse. And this may sound ancient, but in fact this was 2001. Although granted, that might be ancient for some of you. So what the biggest challenge was for all of us was that basically email was the fastest way of communications, and Skype and all those tools didn't exist yet. So we even had a 1 day a week video conference. And that meant that we really had to use the time that we had, both as staff, but also the students did, to really communicate effectively, because you couldn't always be in touch. And in fact, if you ask the students from way back then what the biggest challenge was, they said it wasn't the actual design. It was keeping the communication going, and that you have to communicate differently, that you have to communicate far more secondly, and that was the biggest challenge. It took over far more of their design time than they anticipated. And in that sense, they sometimes said it was almost an exercise in efficient communication over a design. But that in itself is not a real disaster, even if that would happen into your DSE, because research shows that when you're an engineer, working as a professional engineer, that over 60% of your time is not spent on engineering or designing, sadly, it is spent on communication. So you might as well get a head start on doing it well.
Yeah, maybe it's even a bit hidden in a normal DSE. You think you're working on engineering, but you're actually communicating. So probably it's just a bit more pronounced if you do it online, but effectively the communication is always there. What type of issues can students expect? What can go wrong? What type of issues?
So expect Murphy's Law to strike at any point, right? Anything that can go wrong will go wrong. So there are many sorts of issues. One of them can be misunderstandings in task divisions. If Joe agreed to do a design 1 and Claire agreed to do design 2, and one misunderstood the other, they could both be working on design 1, and unless they regularly talk to each other, they don't find out until, hopefully in your case, a few hours later, but in the worst case, maybe a few days later. And those are wasted days. So it's really important that you take that into account. Other stuff is that you forget to do stuff because everybody else thinks somebody else is doing it. And normally when you're in your face-to-face environment in the project rooms, you could see on one of your whiteboards who was doing what and tick things off. Now you don't have that unless you find yourself a digital tool to do this. So that's one of the challenges. Another one is you're all at home, each in your own surroundings. Some of you will be in your student homes. Some of you are at mom and dad's. Some of you may have other obligations. That means that although you're all supposed to work 8 hours a day, it is much harder to have exactly the same working time. So it's really important that you communicate who's working when, and also take into account that people may have other obligations at this stage. Some of the things you can't anticipate.
How did we do that when we had the DSE together with Australia?
They only had a few hours per day to talk to, so their video conferences were always starting straight at 8 a.m. So that's one of the things you could say, when are your communication things? But that also had an advantage, because I think that was probably one of the few DSEs that worked 24/7, because they handed over the work from Europe to Australia, went to bed, and then the next morning Australia had finished something and they could continue. But again, the handover was everything. Also keep in mind that not everybody has all the facilities available. Some of you may have good webcams, good phones. Others of you may have a laptop that is on its last legs. Those are also some of the things. Then there's also the risk of misinterpretation, especially over email or over chat. It's very easily have something go wrong that you didn't intend to say is harsh, but maybe when you read it, it comes across as much harsher. So that's another risk you have to anticipate. And then there's the different technical issues. You all have your own laptop, but chances are that you're all running different versions of different software. So it's very useful if you at least agree in which format you're going to save all your files, so that people can actually open each other's files without first having to ask someone can you save it to version X?
Google Docs, for instance, would be an option to work in.
Yes, but it's also the versions of MATLAB. It's the things you don't think about. The other thing is the accidental exclusion of teammates. So you've started your video conference, and you suddenly realize that somebody isn't there. Or someone is away for a day and you haven't actually written a report about the meeting. How do they catch up? And before you know it, especially in this online environment, and especially because it's not as we had 6 versus 6, but in this case, you're all on your own. A person is very easily left out or feels left out, and that is also something that can easily go wrong.
How do you solve this? Is this minutes taking? Normally you have in the team a team leader and a secretary, and these roles can rotate in the team. Does it help in that case?
Yes. Another thing to consider doing is recording, with the permission of everyone, of course, is recording a meeting so somebody can watch it back. And also your quality control officer in your group has a really, really important task to make sure that everybody's singing from the same song sheet. And that's my last one, is the compliance issues. Make sure that everybody knows which version you're working on, that you don't have 5 different report versions, or worse of it, somebody is still working with the parameters that you did 2 weeks ago. So that really, really can lead to a lot of problems.
I think I really would stress that. Build yourself a document in Excel which you can share online with all the latest data, and update that once a day, twice a day, or once a week. But everyone takes that file with the most recent data, so you're not working on an old design.
And use some of the project management software such as Basecamp or Trello, where you have tasks where you can move things to ongoing or completed, assign responsibilities, and even add things or ask each other questions, because those are really, the traceability of what you're trying to do is the most important part, and really where most of it can go wrong.
Okay. We know about the issues. But what can you do to avoid them? If they arise, you have to solve them, of course, but how do you avoid this? How do you avoid miscommunication, for instance?
Miscommunication, one of the things is be aware that these are stressful times. You're doing something that is out of your comfort zone. Your tutor is supervising something that is out of their comfort zone. The way we're doing this, we've never done this before. Aside from that, the world around us is also going crazy. So miscommunications will happen. People will have bad days. People will get distracted or forget things. The most important thing to remember is nobody does this on purpose. It's usually a sign that it's time to take it easy as opposed to get extra agitated. So if that happens, try not to go into the judgment. Well, you should have known. So I'll say, that went wrong. Is there? What can we do to fix it? How can we help? But that's the most important thing. Also, if somebody does have a bad day, especially if you're on the receiving end, try and be the better person and solve it and reach out your hand to them. Because most of the time when somebody has a bad day and blows their gasket, they know and they're actually quite embarrassed. So for them it's much harder to say something because they're worried that you're still angry. Whereas if you take the first step, especially if you did nothing wrong, why shouldn't you take the first step? It is much easier to resolve this. And if that doesn't work, what's really important is that the rest of the team doesn't take sides. This isn't high school or primary school even anymore. You know, you're all supposed to be grown-ups. You're all supposed to be able to go out into the workplace in theory after this.
Yeah,
so
well, actually, you must imagine you're an engineering department, and you have a customer that's paying you serious amounts of money. In this case, man hours. Really, in the first video, I said, well, compare this 4,000 man hours at the rate of 100, 125 euros an hour. You're easily talking €500,000. So you have a responsibility there.
So in that sense, treat it as such. Treat it as if you were in a professional setting. And that brings me to the other point. Whatever you do, assume that you're in a professional setting. Because you never know who will pop into the next video conference for whatever reason. So, as much as sounding like your mother, tidy up your room. Nobody wants to see the moldy plates from 5 weeks ago behind you. Nobody wants to see your pile of unwashed clothes behind you. Make it look professional. Imagine that the president of Boeing could be walking into your video conferencing at any moment in time and you want to make a good impression. So that also means no meetings from bed and get dressed. However trivial, trust me, it has gone wrong badly. So keep it professional. Act as if you were a normal day in the office.
Okay, any other ways to solve the issues?
Well, the other thing is...
Avoid the issues,
is agree when you are and are not available. I think that's a key item. I mean, as much as it is tempting to have a video conferencing tool open 8 hours a day, aside from the fact that what that would do to the bandwidth in your building, you also need downtime. So make clear agreements on when you are available and when you're not available. And also try and make sure you get enough rest and fresh air and all these other really trivial but really important things. And that it's okay to not answer your WhatsApp group at 2 a.m. and that most things can wait until the morning. Because that's also really important to make sure that you agree when you are in the office and when you're not. Make sure you have some sort of rhythm going.
Yeah, we basically want you to keep track of the hours you make. So the question is, keep track of your 8 hours a day, write down what you have done, how much time you spend it, share that with the team leader, and he or she will share that with the principal tutor. But it doesn't matter whether you work from 9 to 5 or from 8 to 4 or so. You have to reach an agreement as a group how you do this. The limit is 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, but how you divide it, that's the responsibility of your group.
Exactly, and make sure you communicate that to your tutor so that they're also aware. Also make sure that you know when you, what moment you are going to have your meetings and that they work, and also be flexible on that. Things may happen as to where certain people can't make a meeting, and then make sure you're able to move them. And probably one of the other really important thing is try and avoid conflict. So when you don't understand something, even if you are very, very introvert, please don't stay quiet. Say, I'm sorry, I didn't quite get that. Can you explain? I can't stress how often things actually that are very small escalate because people didn't ask at the time and thought, oh, I'll work it out on my own. I don't want them to know that I'm stupid. As with all questions, the only stupid question is the one that isn't asked. But
there's no such thing as stupid questions. Yeah. There's stupid answers, but no stupid questions.
Yeah. So please don't be quiet out of fear of embarrassment. And the second one, and I think that's an aerospace thing anyway, own your mistakes. The worst you can do is, if you make a mistake, is not tell the rest of your group. Because eventually it will always get found out, and then you're sometimes weeks down. And you also lose the trust of your teammates. So own your mistakes. Say, oh, hey guys, sorry, I screwed that up really badly. We need to have another look at that. It is much easier to work together if you have a safe environment in which you can just say, hey, that didn't go quite well, than if you start hiding it, because then the actual team will start breaking down, because people are constantly wondering if the data they're having or if the work that they are getting is correct or is working. So as with all these things in aerospace, it's perfectly okay to speak up if something goes wrong. It doesn't count against you. I think what counts against you is if you don't speak up.
No, that's what we call the safety culture of aviation. Making mistakes is not an issue. Hiding a mistake is an issue, because that will cost lives. So we all make mistakes, and that's why I think it's also stressed the importance of a quality control officer within your team, so that there is a check, not because you don't trust each other, but because we know that people make mistakes.
I also talked about Murphy's Law before. One of the things is you all have your own laptop, or some may even have a desktop. The biggest risk you run is if you store things locally and your hard disk decides to go belly up, or your coffee goes all over your keyboard, etc. Although it's already a disaster that you may have a problem with your laptop, it's far more annoying if all your files that you need for the DSE are also gone. So make sure that you have a good, safe, common file storage, that you have a good file convention so you don't overwrite each other's files. But make sure that if something happens to your computer, that at least you can go working on another machine. Should this happen, and you no longer have a machine, don't just wait for the repairman to go by. Make sure the rest know, and see if there's a solution we can come up with. Maybe somebody else has a machine lying about. If not, also ask if the tutor can help. Sometimes there is a laptop in a department that you can borrow for the time being. But whatever you do, make sure that these sort of setbacks don't slow you down. Because right now that machine is your only connection to the rest of your group. So it's really important that you have that connection.
Okay, we're near the end of this video. Any last final advice?
Yeah.
Golden tips.
Have fun. And I mean that in the most... it's a great exercise. You learn a lot from each other. Normally you're much closer together. But even if you're at a distance, that doesn't mean you can't do fun things. Even we as staff do fun things like online pop quizzes on Twitch, where we sit together and try and beat other teams. I know that there are teams who play online Pictionary. So I mean more than just multiplayer shooter games, guys. There's other things in the world, really. But also you can have a virtual team dinner where you all cook the same thing, and then each other show off who cooked the nicest. And feel free to ask your tutor or your coaches to join. You might be surprised how fanatic they are at winning in certain competitions. And hopefully, let's hope so that there will be a 1.5 meter solution so that you can actually meet face to face on occasion.
We will see. Thank you very much for joining me. Thank you very much for all these tips. Bye-bye.
Bye.